and he quickly discovered that his new empire was basically ungovernable, even for a superb politician. Which he was not. Things fell apart rather swiftly. Perdiccas quarrelled with and alienated Alexander's other senior generals, though in truth it is hard to see how he could have satisfied all their ambitions. Rather like Alexander himself, these generals were as single-mindedly ambitious, unscrupulous, and amoral as sharks. Aficionados of Macedonian politics might have laid bets as to who would be the first to stab Perdiccas in the back, and those who put their money on Ptolemy would have scooped the pool. Ptolemy I Soter, 367 to 283 BC, had decided early that he fancied Egypt, and he lobbied hard for the job of governor. He was granted his wish, partly because Egypt in any case needed a new governor to replace the current incumbent, who was both disloyal and corrupt. In this regard, Ptolemy was a definite improvement, since he was merely disloyal. Perdiccas discovered this fact when he received word that the remains of Alexander had been hijacked en route to his planned tomb in Macedonia. As a result of this intervention, with great ceremony, Alexander was interred first in central Egypt and later in Alexandria, the Egyptian city he founded in 331 BC. This act of disobedience was rightly construed as a unilateral declaration of independence. Perdiccas had little choice but to try to bring his mutinous subordinate to heel, lest the generals commanding the rest of the empire quickly follow Ptolemy's example and launch a series of secessions. Ptolemy knew what he wanted, and also the limits of his ambition. When Perdiccas proved unable to force his way into Egypt to quash the rebellion, he was assassinated by his own officers, who offered Ptolemy rule of the entire Macedonian empire. Ptolemy politely refused. Egypt was enough for him, and the land was to remain in the possession of his family and descendants for the next 3 centuries. Once Perdiccas was dead, all the pretense that the Macedonian Empire was a united entity was abandoned. Secure behind the natural defences of sea and desert, Ptolemy doubtless watched with interest as Alexander's remaining generals fell upon one another in round after round of brutal warfare, punctuated by shifting alliances, brutal double-crosses, and faithless truces. For a while it seemed that a general called Antigonus Monothalmus and his son Demetrius would end up on top. However, that threatened supremacy caused all his rivals to unite against Antigonus. In 301 BC, the Confederation forced Antigonus to battle at Ipsus in Asia Minor. Antigonus lost the battle and his life. The mercurial Demetrius tried to keep going without his father, but the tide of war had turned against him. As the world moved into the 3rd century BC, the fate of Alexander's empire was becoming apparent. Egypt was Ptolemaic, and the opportunistic Ptolemy would try to expand into Libya in the west, and as far into Syria as possible, while using his navy to dominate the islands of the eastern Mediterranean. At the same time, Ptolemy tried hard to be a pharaoh to his Egyptian subjects, and a Hellenistic king to the many Greeks who began emigrating to his domains. This split Egyptian/Greek personality was to remain a standard feature as long as the Ptolemaic dynasty endured. Macedonia, where it had all started, quickly became less relevant to the affairs of the rest of the empire. The kingdom had its own problems close to hand, and while they were coping with invaders from Epirus or across the Danube, Macedon's rulers had little interest in affairs in Bactria or India, and little ability to interfere there even if they had wanted to. Which they didn't. The main preoccupation of the Macedonians was fighting off barbarian invasions of their kingdom. The second priority was to keep a grip on those parts of Alexander's empire which they regarded as theirs. This included Thrace, rich in minerals and manpower, and the rest of Greece, rich in little other than trouble. Nevertheless, Greece came with a cultural heritage which strengthened the Macedonians' claim to be Greeks. And anyway, Greece would be even more trouble if it became independent, or was conquered by another of the Hellenistic powers. The Macedonian rulers also ended up as the guardians of the surviving family of Alexander the Great. This was not a happy situation for those family members, because Macedon's rulers saw them as at best political pawns, and at worst rivals.